Добрый вечер. Меня коллеги просили сказать несколько слов о результатах нашего телефонного разговора с президентом Соединенных Штатов. Действительно, этот разговор состоялся, продолжался более 2 часов. Хочу отметить, что он был очень содержательным и весьма откровенным. И в целом, на мой взгляд, в этой связи весьма полезным. Прежде всего, я поблагодарил президента Соединенных Штатов за поддержку со стороны США возобновления прямых переговоров между Россией и Украиной по поводу возможного заключения мирного соглашения. По поводу возобновления переговоров, которые были прерваны украинской стороной, как известно, еще в 2022 году. Президент Соединенных Штатов высказал свою позицию по поводу прекращения боевых действий, перемирия. И со своей стороны отметил также, что и Россия выступает за мирное урегулирование украинского кризиса. Мы должны просто определить наиболее эффективные пути движения к миру. Договорились с президентом Соединенных Штатов о том, что Россия предложит и готова работать с украинской стороной над меморандумом по поводу возможного будущего мирного договора с определением ряда позиций, таких как, например, принципы урегулирования, сроки возможного заключения мирного соглашения и так далее, включая и возможное прекращение огня на определенное время в случае достижения соответствующих договоренностей. Кстати говоря, контакты между участниками встречи и переговоров в Стамбуле, они возобновились, и это дает основание полагать, что мы в целом на правильном пути. Еще раз хочу подчеркнуть, что беседа была очень конструктивной, и я ее оцениваю высоко. Вопрос, конечно, в том, чтобы российская и украинская сторона проявили максимум стремления к миру и нашли бы те компромиссы, которые бы устроили все стороны. При этом хочу отметить, что в целом позиция России ясна. Главное для нас – устранить первопричины этого кризиса. Но если потребуется что-то уточнить, то пресс-секретарь Песков и мой помощник господин Ушаков разъяснят чуть позднее какие-то детали наших сегодняшних переговоров с президентом Трампом по телефону. Вам спасибо.
I wanted to play that out in its entirety because I wanted you guys to see what was said in regards to Putin coming out in the meeting, because the language is very important in regards to what he's saying in his language. He's being very political. He's being a diplomat. If you notice, the Russian side has been always diplomatic in the way that they've talked about the stuff in comparison to the Trump side, who will put out tweets, will put out screaming headlines and all of this other stuff that Trump typically does on Twitter or social media. But they've always been, contrary to popular belief in the West, open to a ceasefire, probably far more than what some of the hardliners in Russia would want. But the ceasefire has to be rational. And so you got to kind of look at his language in regards to what is being said and what Trump got out of this. Trump got nothing out of this. Maybe you could say the meeting, but Putin proposed the meeting in Istanbul. Trump just co-signed it and said, hey, Zelensky, go to the meeting now, with a hidden undercurrent of, or else, just kind of floating behind it without it being said. So you can't even say really got that. You could say that under the Biden administration, the two sides weren't talking. That's fair. But what else did you really get? You really didn't get anything that the Russians weren't already offering. They were offering, though, under certain conditions. And if you listen to what Putin is saying in this, the conditions remain the same. He says we had a substantive and quite frank, okay, each side presented exactly what they thought of their particular terms in regard to some kind of deal or agreement. I would imagine Putin expressed the red lines that Russia had and what their demands were. And I would imagine Trump gave that ridiculous 21-point plan and begging for a ceasefire again, because again, you want a ceasefire because Zelensky his people are getting chewed alive. And when Russia's putting 30,000 people, volunteers, a month on their military, when they built up 2 additional militaries, including new hardware and everything else, and Ukraine is struggling to get weapons, struggling to get anti-air missiles and whatever else, and snatching people off the streets to throw them advance, you can understand why the Trump administration, who is backing Zelensky, proxy of the United States, would want a ceasefire to give their people time to rest, recuperate, get more weapons, get more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's obvious, right? Donald Trump is acting as if he's a mediator when he's a participant in the conflict. It's a nonsense position to pretend as if, well, I didn't have anything to do with this. This is not my war. Okay, well, the CIA, as Mark pointed out, was in Ukraine during the Trump administration. Okay, did the Trump administration have control over the CIA when they were ensconced in Ukraine, pushing and getting things organized? I hope you get my point. The notion that Donald Trump is, I'm just a passerby, an innocent bystander that just so happened he came in to try to mediate the conflict. As I give them weapons, as I give them intelligence, as they fire missiles into Russia, as they try to get back into Kursk, as they try to do all of this stuff with my weapons, my intelligence, my armaments. Yeah, I'm totally just an innocent mediator. It's dishonest on his face. But Putin is not going to call him on it because all things being equal, Russia does want a settlement to the conflict. Look, if you're Russia, what you want out of this is no NATO expansion, diplomatic ties on some level, meaning you want to be safe, ultimately. You want the Russian speakers to be safe. You don't want a batshit crazy government in Ukraine that is whipping up another war in the next 5 or 10 years. You want to settle this issue for once and for good. If that means you go to the border of Poland, then it means you go to the border of Poland. If it means you have to fight a war with Europe later on, then that means you have to fight a war with Europe later on. But those aren't things that you want. You want a settlement. And considering it's the United States that's effectively backing Zelensky, that push this war and provoked it in the first place, then you pretty much have to deal with the US if that's indeed what you want. It is always an option to keep going. But if you can get what you want in the diplomatic sense, then you get what you want in the diplomatic sense. The catch becomes, can you do that? Can the president even offer that? Can the US president accept that the 4 regions are in the Russian constitution, belong to Russia? Can they accept a new government in Kiev, getting rid of the Banderites? Can you accept no NATO expansion and having that ensconced into law, where the European Union also validates the fact that this is now a no NATO expansion, a new security architecture of Europe? Can you, as an American president, accept those things? No. The answer is no, you can't. Can Russia accept the nonsense proposals that Donald Trump is coming up with? A ceasefire, but that's a no on its face for obvious reasons. Can you accept, okay, we'll accept a ceasefire if you don't give them intelligence, you don't give them weapons, you don't, Europe doesn't continue to give them weapons, Germany doesn't continue to give them weapons, the UK doesn't continue to give them weapons, they don't continue to raise their military, they don't continue to grab people off the streets. Okay, well, that's not part of the ceasefire agreement. So again, the answer becomes no. All of these things don't meet. And because all of these things don't meet, the notion that you're going to have some kind of agreement was always dead on arrival. It's a reason I call that video Dead Letter as the title when Donald Trump first put out his peace plan. And Kellogg's plan is even more ludicrous than Donald Trump's original peace plan. I guess those things are the same, the 21-point plan. I guess I'm pointing out that, A, Zelensky doesn't want peace. He's still out there effectively saying NATO is part of the constitution of Ukraine. And so, this is something we effectively have to work towards. Okay, there's that. Europe is still talking about putting troops in Ukraine. Even the Kellogg plan is talking about putting NATO troops in Ukraine. Okay, all of these things are non-starters. So whatever was going to be achieved, just because Donald Trump gets on the phone and talks to Putin. Hey, Vladimir. Hey, Donald. Nice music you listen to. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, let's talk about the ceasefire. Okay, let's talk about the ceasefire. This is what we need. We need the Ukrainian troops to leave the areas that now belong to Russia. We need no NATO expansion. We need that enshrined into law. We need protection for the Russian speakers that are in the remainder of Ukraine. We need the Banderites to be out of government, meaning we need to denazify Ukraine. And we need Ukraine to validate that these regions are now part of the Russian Federation. Oh, Vladdy, that's a tall order, buddy, for the U.S. president. How about this? What if, we call a ceasefire now, unconditional. We put NATO troops in Ukraine. We take over the power plant in Zaporozhye. Okay, niet. You can stop there, Donald. Niet. No. We're not on the same page. No. Okay, well, I don't want to look like an asshole when I go back and tell the people that you effectively told me to go F myself. So what if we come up with a memorandum of understanding on the pathway to end the conflict? Okay, we can do that. I mean, look, we want a ceasefire too, meaning Russia. We want a ceasefire. We want to stop this. We don't want to have our people fighting for another 2 years to take over all of Ukraine. We don't want that. We don't want to go to the border of Poland. Those, racist Western Ukrainers, well, we don't want to have to deal with that. We will if we have to, but we don't want to. So yeah, let's do that. We can do that. And as I pointed out, they're okay with the ceasefire. They've said it as much. It's just the US and Europe doesn't want to accept rational terms that you don't continue to build up a military as we have a ceasefire where you freeze the conflict on these lines, you build up another military, and we have to fight this again in a few years after you've rebuilt your forces. This is a non-starter. This is a nonsense proposition. No rational actor would accept it, especially considering we're winning on the battlefield. So I'd imagine what Putin gave Donald Trump, very diplomatically in the way that he does, is a surrender demand. Donald Trump, being a U.S. president, can't accept a surrender demand, despite the fact that even Trump admits, A, it's a proxy war, and B, Russia's going to take all of Ukraine, which means you've lost the proxy war. So they come up with a memorandum of understanding. He said, we'll have direct talks between Russia and Ukraine. He points out that Ukraine was the one that broke off those talks with the West, pushed by the United States, UK, to end the conversation. What Russia has effectively most likely told Trump, we're willing to have negotiations, providing that under the Istanbul lines, meaning what we agreed upon in Istanbul remains true with the addition of the 4 extra regions that we have now put into the Russian constitution. Okay, well, so yeah, we're willing to have direct talks under Istanbul format. We'll do that. That's what we were doing anyway. That's what I asked for. That's what you agreed upon. No issue with that. Russia is never against the ceasefire. A memorandum of peace agreements and principles of the settlement. Okay, well, what does Russia need to end the war? Russia told Ukraine that at the Istanbul II summit. This is what we need to end the war. We need you to leave our regions. Full stop. We call it a day. Ukraine is shocked by that. Europe is shocked by that. Europe is acting as if Russia is somehow stringing Trump along or is maximizing their demands. Their demands were their demands. They told you exactly what they needed in order to end the conflict. They weren't hiding the ball. They weren't stringing him along. They told you like a year ago, hell, you can go back to 2022 at the Istanbul format. This is what we need. Now, considering facts on the ground, those needs have escalated for obvious reasons. And if you keep going, those needs will escalate further. It won't be 4 regions. It will be 8. It will be Odessa, which is what they want anyway. It will be Sumy. It'll be the other regions that they're going to effectively take over. Keep messing around. That's what, just being straightforward. Ceasefire if appropriate agreement is reached. So if we come to terms and you accept our demands, then yeah, we're fine with a ceasefire. Because under those guidelines, no intelligence, no expansion of the military, etc. Meaning, if you accept the guidelines that we put down, we're willing to have a ceasefire as we work this out. If not, any negotiation needs to take place with the military still pushing. The reason that you must understand, the reason that they're so panicky about this in Europe and in the US, I love Alexander Macaris. I think he's getting this wrong though. In one of his videos, he pointed out that he thinks Europe is delusional about the realities on the ground, that they're purely taking their information from Ukraine. And so they're coming to a wrong assessment of the battlefield conditions. I think he's wrong on that. I think Europe doesn't care about Ukrainians any more than America cares about Ukrainians. And if Zelensky and his band of neo-Nazis want to continue fighting, they're willing to have them fight to the last dead Ukrainian. They have their own intelligence services. Are you telling me that Britain doesn't have an intelligence service that can look at the ground and say, hey, Russia's, they're continuously moving westward? France that have intelligence services on the ground saying, hey, they're continuously moving westward. That they're totally relying upon a lying government that's radically corrupt like Ukraine for all of their information about what's taking place on the battlefield. I don't buy that. What I buy is that they fully understand what is happening on the ground. They fully understand the Ukrainian military is getting chewed up. They don't care anymore than America does. From the standpoint of if an agreement is reached, well, again, you have to get an agreement before you get the ceasefire. How do you get the agreement? It's that. So this is political language. If and then statements. Again, they weren't against the ceasefire. If we come to some kind of deal, some kind of agreement, we can come to terms. If not, we keep going and we keep going and we keep going. We don't care about your sanctions. You haven't been able to change the context on the battlefield. You've thrown every weapon that you can throw in. We will keep going. We will keep fighting this war. If we need to fight it for another year, if we need to fight it for another 2 years, if we need to take Kiev, if we need to take Odessa, we will do all of those things. Understand where we are in this. I have an 80%, if not more, approval rating. It's not going anywhere. We are united in a patriotic mission to beat back the Nazis that you have unleashed to go after our government and our country. It is existential from our point of view. That is the way to look at it. So Putin cannot back down on this. And any language that is being used when he's having a conversation with Donald Trump is consistent with where he was prior to the phone call. And that last part, Russia's position is clear. We want to eliminate the root cause of the crisis. There's no deviation in the position. There's no deviation in anything that he had a conversation with Donald Trump with. We can draw up a memorandum of a peace agreement and principles of settlement. But what do you think those principles are going to be? What do you think Zelensky's principles are going to be for a settlement? Do you think those things are going to match? Zelensky is still out here saying, we're going to be part of NATO. We are not going to give up any territory. And to be very clear, he would be hanging from a flagpole like Mussolini if he did sign a surrender document, which is what the Russians are looking for. You must understand where the sides stand. That's where we are. Donald Trump got nothing out of that phone call that the Russians weren't already saying that they were willing to give, which is effectively, we want your surrender. I could be wrong, just my point of view. Oh, my point is, the Europeans are looking at this kind of like the Americans are looking at the Europeans. From the Americans' point of view, Ukraine is a proxy. That proxy is being used to weaken and damage Russia, to sap the energy out of Russia, to keep the Russian military, for that matter, Russia, out of other affairs around the globe. That is what they are trying to do. The problem with that is that you have now woken a monster. Well, I don't want to say I'm correcting Alexander Macaris. I would never say I'm correcting him. I just disagree with him. I could be wrong in my assessment. I just can't believe that they would be that ideologically blind to believe Ukraine. I think that in the same way the U.S. says Hey, it's not Americans being killed, so it's a bargain for us to put money into it. It's just Ukrainians. I suspect Europe is thinking the exact same thing. And in their minds, we're going to build up our own weapons industry. Germany has just put out a contract where they're apparently going to be building missiles and bullets and these type of things. Okay, well, that's them building up their own militaries while Ukraine is being chewed up. Think of it like a blocking maneuver. Okay, we need to get our troops out. Okay, so we need one guy or two guys to be sacrificial while we get our troops out to safety. Ukraine as a country is that guy, as Europe tries to build up some kind of military capacity with the idea of fighting the Russians at some date, or at the very least being a bulwark against the Russians, as the US moves its affairs to other interests vis-a-vis China. That's my take. That's what I think. And to be very clear on this, where's, what's his name? Am I missing something? No, sent him the link. Okay. We'll just keep going. And to make this clear, Donald Trump puts out his tweet saying ceasefire negotiations are going to start immediately. Okay, well, no, because you get Peskov, who pointed out this part. There's no deadline for peace talks. There's no deadline for a memorandum. And again, it's just a memorandum. Each side is going to express what they believe or what they want in regards to some kind of deal. Hey, in your mind, what does a deal, a settlement look like for this conflict? Russia gives theirs, Ukraine gives theirs. Do you honestly think these things are going to meet one another? They're not. And even if you're talking about peace talks, again, the reason that the Russians sent military people there is because the military are the people who know, A, what's going on the ground, B, are the ones that made that sacrifice when they were putting their lives and their bodies on the line to do it. And on some level, they need to be satisfied with whatever deal comes out. You effectively have 1 million men under arms. You want those people satisfied and made whole in regards to any negotiations that take place. Now, the question is Ukraine willing to accept any of these terms? If Zelensky is saying, I am not willing to even give up territory, I am not willing to give up NATO aspirations, how do you come to a deal? How do you come to even an understanding of a deal under those terms? Especially when Russia is effectively saying, we are sticking with the Istanbul format, plus the additional territories that we've taken. Right now, the reason that Europe is so panicky is because what they know is that Russia is planning an offensive. Russia has been building up a huge amount of military, as I said, 2 additional militaries, new kit. You have 300 or 30,000 people joining each month. Those people have been trained. Those people are rested. Those people are ready to go into combat. If you already have 600,000, let's say 700,000 men on the front lines, and they are already moving forward in an attrition warfare where they're consistently moving forward inexorably westward, what does another 300,000, effectively a third of your current military added, what does that do? What does that look like? Especially if you're Ukraine and you're drafting women and children into the battlefield because you have run out of manpower. What does it look like to you? What does it look like to Europe? Don't you think Europe knows that Russia is planning an offensive? Don't you think that Europe knows, they can see with their own intelligence, hey, they've built 2 militaries. They have one on the Finnish border and they have one in reserve. What do you think the one in reserve going to do? Hey, what do you think the one in Finland may do when it realizes that Finland is not going to attack Russia? What do you think they're going to do? And what does it look like for the battlefield? That doesn't look good, does it? Hence, the cocaine panic on the train that has been taking place. I'm saying they know it. They know what's coming. They may not be big maneuver warfare, but the fact that they're already being chewed away in this attrition battle, and you're adding 300,000 men to the battlefield with new kit, that doesn't look good. That looks horrible for you. Now, the question for Donald Trump is, what does Trump do going forward? Donald Trump has to make a choice. Zelensky is not going to play ball. Russia is willing to play ball, but they're not going to play ball under your terms. Your terms are absurd. So what does he do? Does he continue to give weapons? Does he walk? Does he walk and continue to give weapons? Does he put sanctions? This idea that it's not your war, however, nobody believes that. You may try to sell that. Nobody believes that. Donald Trump was asked at a press conference recently. I think this was yesterday. Listen to what he says here. He keeps making this argument. It's not my war. You're the president of the United States. Dude, you're giving them money and weapons. You're giving them intelligence. Your HIMARS can't even fire without U.S. permission. Hamas has been firing. It's your war. Own it.
Do you have a red line in your head of what would cause you to back away? And
Yeah, in my head, but not something I'm going to announce. But yeah, definitely in my head, I did. Yeah, because this isn't our war. This is not my war. This is not the war. I mean, we got ourselves entangled in something that we shouldn't have been involved in, and we would have been a lot better off. And maybe the whole thing would have been better off because it can't be much worse. It's a real mess. It's a death trap. So I think that, yeah, I would say I do have a certain line, but I don't want to say what that line is because I think it makes the negotiation even more difficult.
Trump could pass sanctions. Russia doesn't care, but he could do it. Trump could continue to send weapons. It's not going to change anything, but he could do it. And maybe he knows it. And maybe in his hearts of hearts, he does want a deal. But you must understand the deal that Donald Trump wants is on U.S. terms. And U.S. terms are not ending a conflict in the real sense of the word, in the way that Russia wants to end the conflict. What Trump wants to do is freeze it with this idea that you can come back to it later. Just because you put something in a constitution, it can be changed. Ukraine had neutrality in its constitution. They changed it to being part of NATO. Just because, somebody says something doesn't mean that can't change in a few years. Look at what Donald Trump has done to all of the deals that he's effectively ripped up. I'm ripping up the JCPOA. I'm ripping up all of the missile agreements that were done between the Soviet Union and the United States, or for that matter, Russia and the United States. They're heartbeat. Why can't the next president do the same thing? You must understand, Moscow lived through the Minsk 1 and 2. They've lived through the Istanbul agreements. There is no trust, nor should there be, if you're a rational actor. J.D. Vance came out, and again, they are saying things that in reality are not looking at it from the Russian position. They're only looking at it from their own point of view, this American point of view that believes other people believe they're love and light, or that is trying to insist that Donald Trump is somehow a mediator in a conflict that he himself is a party to.
Talks have been proceeding for a little while. We realize there's a bit of an impasse here, and I think the president's going to say to President Putin, look, are you serious? Are you real about this? I think, honestly, that President Putin, he doesn't quite know how to get out of the war. This is a little bit of guess, but I think the president would agree that part of this is I'm not sure that Vladimir Putin has a strategy himself for how to unwind the war, of course, that's been going on for a few years now. There's fundamental mistrust between Russia and the West. It's one of the things the president thinks is frankly stupid, that we should be able to move beyond the mistakes that have been made in the past, but that takes two to tango. I know the president's willing to do that.
Have you ever seen somebody in an abusive relationship? Have you? Or for that matter, somebody that was married and had a divorce? I was married. I've been divorced, my ex-wife and I. There's a complicated history between the two people, and there are mistakes that both people make, sometimes one person, but in many cases that both people make, that you can't really unravel that stuff. It's hard to unravel it because you remember everything that took place. And even if there was a fundamental change in the other person, which there's not, by the way, but even if there was, you remember everything that the person did. You know that they knocked over the Ukrainian government in 2014. You know that they put in a bunch of Banderites that were riding tanks with Nazi insignias on in Kursk region, which is, again, astonishing, right? You know that they had CIA all throughout the Ukraine. You know that they were firing on the Donbass with the U.S. being viceroy of Ukraine as they were doing it. You know that over the last 3 years that the U.S. provoked the war by expanding NATO to the border, lied about even whether or not they were going to move to an inch to the east. They didn't just move an inch to the east, they moved to the entire border. And you know that in the context of the Minsk 1 and 2 agreements, that you had no plans on fulfilling the obligations of those agreements. Russia knows all of this stuff. They know that you were killing Russians, whether it's 100,000 or 200,000 dead. It's besides the fact that the U.S. was directing those bullets, those bombs, that artillery that killed those Russians. They know that. So you are now like, we should just move past this. It's pretty easy for you to say, considering it wasn't your people being killed by you and your government. This is the point that I'm trying to make here, this American point of view that looks at this stuff like, we should just yada past this. No big deal. We think this is stupid. We should just move on. When Europe has taken it as almost an act of faith that they need to continue to expand to the border of Russia to create this Hobbes choice of either you allow yourself to be surrounded with NATO on your border. And again, Ukraine has been a pathway by which the West has invaded Russia multiple times in the last war, killing, 30 million Russians, in the war before that, 10 million. When you know that, and you get somebody like Vance who comes in and is like, we should just move past this. What is your thinking process? What do you think about that in those terms? You would think that person is lost, his ever-loving mind, and is only looking at it from a very specific point of view. And especially when they put out a deal, and the deal is talking about putting American troops in Russian territory to hold the nuclear power plant that is now part of your own constitution. It's absurd. This is absurdity. Donald Trump is still supplying weapons. Donald Trump just signed a mineral deal with Ukraine that is like a Lend-Lease agreement that would allow the U.S. to continue to give weapons. Donald Trump just approved or pushed Germany to give additional armaments, and for that matter, told Israel to give additional armaments to Ukraine. They've been going around the world trying to get weapons to give to Ukraine. If Donald Trump was serious, he would have stopped doing that. He would have potentially even just walked. If Donald Trump wants to stop the proxy war, Donald Trump would walk. Trump is not doing that. He's entangling himself in this and is doing exactly the same things that Joe Biden is doing, with the exception of one quirk that he claims he wants to get an agreement, despite the fact that the terms that he's putting for that agreement are nonsense and non-starters. And if you can empathize that this is existential from the Russian point of view, and what they want is no NATO expansion, meaning they want a new security architecture of Europe. That's what they were asking for before the war. That's what they've been asking for the entire time. And under no circumstances is the U.S. willing to give them that, or for that matter, Europe. And so the war continues. And the war continues until Ukraine military is destroyed. It gets so weak that it's on the brink of collapse, where they're forced to the bargaining table, or whether Russia takes Kiev and goes to the Polish border. It's not Putin that doesn't know how to get out the war. He does, militarily, because at some point they will win this. It may be an ugly win. They may lose more people in the process, but they will win it. It may take a year, it may take 2 years, but they will win it. It's not Putin that can't extricate himself from it. It is the West and the US that can't come to terms. What Europe is betting on is that Ukraine can last for another year or so, which gives them time to build up their own stockpiles. The problem that Europe is going to have is pretty straightforward. Can your government support it? Meaning, yes, you can get rid of the candidates in Romania. You can try to get rid of Marine Le Pen in the way that you got rid of Karlin Gorgescu. You can do that. You could try to find ways to get rid of the AfD in Germany. But you're doing that stuff in such a heavy-handed way that the population sees you doing it. Now, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe you can keep control of those populations as they try to use democracy to force a change in their political affairs. But the moment that you come up with this notion of feeding French to the Russians, feeding Englishmen to the Russians, feeding Germans to the Russians, will your populations accept it? Even with all of the jingoism, even with all the racist rhetoric that you've been using, will they accept going to war, especially if that war is potentially nuclear, considering France and England are nuclear powers? That's the question that they have to deal with. If you're talking about fighting a conventional war with the Russians, you're going to lose. Their production capacity alone outstripes yours. You are unfamiliar with the warfare that you are effectively talking about engaging in. And that's assuming that Europe is even willing to get into a war like that. The point I'm making here is they're feeding Ukraine into a wood chipper knowingly, knowing that Ukraine is collapsing, knowing that they're not going to win, and knowing the situation that is on the battlefield. They just don't care. For them, it's given them time to do something else. Yeah, this is cynical. Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. Ukraine has no way to win the war, and yet Europe still boosts Zelensky's head up. But you must understand, it's not even just Zelensky. Zelensky has a group of people behind him that under no circumstances would allow him to sign a document saying, I'm ending the war. In their minds, there's going to be a miracle at the Vistula. There's going to be some change that happens, some magical door that opens where God gets involved. What is it? Deus Machina, that changes the context of events on the ground. I don't see that. Will it happen? Maybe. I don't see it. And I can't necessarily bet on some miracle to take place when I'm just looking at what is taking place on the battlefield, and I'm looking at logistics, and I'm looking at what Russia has in reserve versus Ukraine effectively being empty in reserve. It's not that the U.S. wouldn't give them the weapons. I'm not even sure the U.S. has the weapons to give in that way. Sure, they're back contracts that Joe Biden signed where weapons are still flowing to Ukraine. But is it enough? Does it meet the gap? And more to the point, do you have even men to carry those weapons into the battlefield? In the first place, do you have women to carry those weapons to the battlefields? The contracts that you offer these kids who get into the battlefield and realize, oh, they lied because my life expectancy is effectively 2 weeks, and it would take years before I'm able to get whatever they were promising me. I'm saying this is where Ukraine is. They're snatching people off the streets in order to throw them into the battlefield. That is not a sustainable pathway. And Europe certainly has to see those videos, has to know it. They have intelligence. Are you telling me that they're unaware of the condition that Ukraine is in this war? So the question for Donald Trump is, what does he do? Putin has effectively told him, kick rocks in a very diplomatic way. Sure, we'll do a memorandum. Okay, whatever. Sure, we'll talk about the ceasefire, providing we get what we want in the ceasefire. Okay, but that's nothing. Trump got a fart in a jar for all intents and purposes. The question at some point is going to come for Donald Trump is, do you walk or do you get more involved? Are you going to pass sanctions like Joe Biden, sanctions that the Russians don't care about? Are you going to add additional weapons? Are you giving more money? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? That is going to be the question that Trump is confronted with. In fact, I would argue that's the question he's confronted with now. And up to this point, he's fenced it where he hasn't, he's, okay, I give a little bit here, I give a little bit there. Russia's not going to accept terms like in Syria, where there was this frozen conflict that everyone pretended as if the conflict was over with. And then in some inopportune moment, it springs up where all of these monsters come out of Idlib and go rummaging through Syria. If you think they're going to accept that when they have given blood and treasure, and they know that the U.S. has been behind it, they know that Europe is behind it, you are out of your mind. And so I have to wonder, is Trump serious about a peace deal? Now, I have to think to myself, maybe he is, but he's so incompetent that he doesn't know anything about the world. So he doesn't understand the Russian position, or maybe he doesn't even care. And he thinks that, well, I'm a US president, I should be able to tell other people what to do. Russia is not your vassal in the way that Europe is. And even your vassal at this point seems to want to keep going in regards to the war. So, no, this phone call didn't yield anything. This phone call was never going to yield anything. And in the context of this phone call, Putin was being very diplomatic and using very diplomatic language. But that diplomatic language inevitably ended up being the exact same thing that was said at the Istanbul Agreement, with the add-on of, we'll have a memorandum. They'll do theirs, we'll do ours. we'll see if there's any room for peace. And I would guarantee you there is not. There is not. So we'll see. But I am very skeptical that anything is going to come of any of this, especially considering the things that Vance and Trump are saying. It's not my war. It is your war. It is your war. Well, these people should just be able to get together. Trump thinks it's stupid that they don't trust each other. Okay, I think you're an idiot if you think that. I think you're an idiot if you think that. And Trump was also asked about sanctions. This is what he said on sanctions. It was like, hey, because of course the US media are hollow monkeys and they make every situation worse when they're analyzing the stuff. Look, I was there at the Biden-Putin summit where Joe Biden and Putin talked because Joe Biden felt that communication had broken down. He was getting freaked out by that because he figured, okay, this is a pathway to end up in a larger war. And Joe Biden and Putin were saying very similar things. Joe Biden initially came out very hawkish, but eventually mellowed over the course of the last 5 minutes or so. And if you listen to what Putin was saying, it sounded something very similar to what Joe Biden was saying. The media was going after Joe Biden in this. Hey, did you tell Putin this? Hey, did you tell Putin that? Hey, did you make this point very clear? The media was doing that. They were the howler monkeys. They were the ones. They were pushing and edging. The president wanted to go further and further. They asked Donald Trump about sanctions. This is what Trump said about, hey, are you going to pass sanctions on people? Because, you didn't really get anything out of this telephone call. It is, are you gonna do that? Are you gonna do that? Are you gonna do that? And if so, why not? This is Trump's response.
Why haven't you increased the sanctions on Russia yet?
Well, because I think there's a chance of getting something done. And if you do that, you can also make it much worse. But there could be a time when that's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So Trump's thing is, well, look, I think we may be able to get a deal done. I don't know why he thinks that. Europe is not for it. Zelensky is not for it. Russia may be for it under certain conditions, but you're not going to give them the conditions. So Russia's not for it under conditions to which you're willing to give. So it sounds like you're the only person that's trying to do it for a campaign thing. But it's not enough. It's not enough. So we will see what that memorandum looks like. As I pointed out, Peskov pointed out, the memorandum is not going to be something that goes back pretty quickly. In fact, just to go into the article real quick, Peskov points out, he says, the Ukraine conflict should be a memorandum outlining the principles and timeline for a peaceful settlement. Peskov told reporters early on Tuesday that, quote, there is not and cannot be a deadline for finalizing such an agreement. So for Donald Trump saying, oh, we'll be doing this in 2 weeks. Dude, no, this is not the way diplomacy works. Nor does diplomacy work with fighting stopping. In many wars, Vietnam is a good example. Fighting kept going as they were negotiating. Why would they stop? Everyone understanding wants this to be done as quickly as possible, but certainly the devil is in the details, Peskov said. He noted that Moscow and Kiev would each draft their own version of a memorandum, after which both sides will face difficult negotiations on agree to a single text. So my question to you is there any room for commonality in regards to a single text when Moscow draft their memorandum of this is what this needs to look like for a peace deal? Your people need to leave. You need to recognize our territory, meaning Istanbul plus the additional 4. What is Zelensky going to say? We're not giving up our territory. We're not doing that. We're not giving up our NATO aspirations. We're not doing that. That's not what's happening. You need to leave. You need to pay us reparations. Putin needs to jump off the Kremlin and die. Like, how do you meld two diametrically opposed points of view? And when that memorandum, both sides put it out, and it's clear that you can't meld them, what does Trump do? What does Trump do? What does Trump do? That's the fascinating part. If Trump decides to walk, does he walk and continue to give weapons and sanctions? Or does he just walk? Okay, I don't think Zelensky's serious. I'm out. All of this is a confidence game for Trump. All of this diplomatic language that Putin is doing is to try to make Trump believe, hey, we're open to a deal, which they are. From Zelensky's part, the reason that he went, not because he wanted to go, he had to go. His master told him to do so. Europe and Kiev are terrified that Trump walks, which is the reason why they have been so adamant about pushing Trump. Hey, we need you to put sanctions. Hey, we need you to back our sanctions. Hey, we need you to do this, this, and this. What does Trump do? That's the question. That is a fascinating question I don't have an answer to. But at some point, it is going to become brimingly clear that there is no melding these two sides. That Ukraine is either going to have to get weaker on the battlefield, their military is going to have to collapse on the battlefield, Russia is going to have to go to Kiev. Something is going to have to happen. Maybe there's political turmoil when it becomes clear that this war is lost in real, brimingly clear terms because the military is collapsing. I don't know. But right now, as it stands, they're not at a place where they're willing to accept that they've lost. And the regime that's in power is not willing to give up the war. They want to keep going. They want to keep fighting. They want to keep grabbing people off the street, people out of barbershops, people walking their dogs. They want to keep doing that. And they want to keep throwing those people on the front lines, chum in the water. It's disgusting. But that's where we are. That's where we are. Don't mistake Putin's diplomatic language for him deviating from his position. He hasn't deviated. He hasn't changed. He hasn't moved one iota. What he is telling Trump is the same thing that they told. The fact that he said a quite frank discussion is political language. We said what we needed to say to each other about where our sides were. And when we realized that these sides were irreconcilable, he wasn't getting a ceasefire. We weren't getting what we wanted out of the deal. We decided to come for something else, which was a memorandum of understanding. It's that. That's what you got. That is what you got. I don't know where Arnold is. Arnold might not have been able to make it today, but we're going to move on. Yeah, we're going to move on. I've covered it. I wanted to get the take of what was taking place in Moscow itself. I've given you a breakdown. I've given you a breakdown of what was taking place